Good morning, everybody. I'm John OLoughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And we'll let the Ospreys welcome us in. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Ospreys. Still haven't seen very many Ospreys here on Mystery Island. Just that very first one, it always shows up first, and he gets that prime nesting spot right at the foot of the bridge. So other than that one, I haven't seen any other ones yet. Andy said he saw one the other day, but could have been the same guy. We don't know. Anyway, there will be a whole flock of them showing up soon, and that'll be fun. We'll definitely be going outside with the iPhones and the gimbals, and see if we can't get you some images of the ospreys as they fly around and go fishing and build their nests. And of course, you know, ScreamingOspreys.com has always got a video feed of osprey nests around the world that's supplied to us by Jumping Mouse, our wonderful Catherine, who keeps up our calendar. And you're going to see if we have any osprey babies growing anywhere around the world on Jumping Mouse's osprey cams. Oh, looky there. Okay. Well, that's just one of the benefits of putting screamingospreys.com on your computer, so you can just put it up on that bar at the top where you can just punch it whenever you want to have a look at the ospreys. And then you can scroll down and get the calendar and the book train and all the current videos that Jumping Mouse is archiving for us on BitChute, with links here provided for you directly from screamingospreys.com, because we're trying to build a community around the website. And so, okay, let's get on to our business for today, which is reading the next section of H. Graham Lowry's How the Nation Was Won. Now, we left off on page 250, and we were introduced to Governor Alexander Spotswood, who was a follower of the good guys in this story, the Earl of Oxford, Jonathan Swift, and the Republican Party, or what we would call it as a small r, Republicans. They wanted to create a republic instead of a monarchy. And that was, you know, an extension of the fight that had gone on all the way through the 17th century, with Oliver Cromwell holding the protectorate of England as kind of a leader of a quasi-republic that fell into a dictatorship, to put it in a nutshell. Well, let's get back to Virginia here, which is the location of our story today. And early Virginia, we are told, was simply a bunch of small little ports that were used for trading, and then basic, very low-level farming with no technology, just a very, very basic countryside, no development going on. And so Andy is going to pull up for you a map now it's called it's a 1715 map. So that's exactly when this stuff is going on. And you can see that the English settlements are right on all of the rivers and have not expanded to the west beyond the place where you can see, if you can, in the middle, the name Rappahannock Sea, which means courthouse. And that's about as far as anything had progressed as of 1715. So let's read a little bit from the book now. Spotswood's policies had pacified the colony's borderlands, and he announced that the cost of their defense had been reduced by 2/3 due to his success in establishing a fortified town for the friendly Indians to the south. He had named it Christiana for Queen Anne, and maintained it with only token deployment of rangers. In time, he added, no soldiers would be needed because the benefits of education at a school at Christiana, I wonder if you can find Christiana on a map. Just I would like to see exactly where it is. While I keep reading, control of Virginia's southern frontier, and it must be in the southern part of Virginia, I guess, was especially important for Spotswood. This was the nexus of William Byrd's opportunities to both arm and make trouble with the Indians through his fur trading operations. It was thus the most dangerous flashpoint for instigating hostilities throughout the interior. Spotswood's other fort at Germanna, where he had settled the German iron makers, already guarded the northern frontier and key routes to the west along the Rappahannock River and its south fork, the Rapidan. He now presented to the House of Burgesses an act for the better regulation of the Indian trade, designed to crush Byrd's southern flank. Spotswood's Indian Act confined all trade south of the James River to the post established at Christiana, under the control of a new state chartered enterprise, the Virginia Indian Company. The company would be responsible for building a schoolhouse for Indian children and for assuming the cost of defense of the fort within 2 years. Another provision designed as a safeguard against legislative sabotage of the colony's defense mandated the construction of a magazine at Williamsburg, with half the cost to be borne by the Virginia India Company. Spotswood himself designed the octagonal brick structure, which initially housed a large supply of arms and ammunition sent to Virginia by Queen Anne shortly before her death. He placed it at a prominent point along Williamsburg's main thoroughfare, not far from where the new governor's mansion was being constructed. Spotswood signed the bill and adjourned the assembly again on Christmas Eve, 1714. That same day, he began organizing the Virginia Indian Company, seeking £4,000 initial capitalization. He sought support of men who had established some interest in the colony. He was determined to exclude control by the great oligarchical landholders. Shares in the company were thus limited to no less than £50 and no more than £100. The new charter company had a monopoly over Virginia's southern Indian trade, especially on these terms, which drove William Byrd into absolute frenzy. He had been the leading Indian trader for years, with his pack trains carrying arms and supplies as far as the Cherokee and Catawba camps in South Carolina. Spotswood had not only defeated his scheme for turning all the Indian tribes into a ring of fire along the colony's frontiers, the governor now threatened to put Byrd out of business altogether. Through his long-standing power on the council, Byrd had maintained the office of Receiver General, overseeing the collection of government revenues, most importantly, the quit-rent taxes on land holdings. Spotswood had discovered massive irregularities in the accounts of these collections and had ordered Byrd and auditor Philip Ludwell to correct the problem. He suspected Byrd and his crony of lining their own pockets. Spotswood was certainly not surprised when they offered no remedy, and in November he introduced a new system of revenue collection, which the council passed despite strenuous objections from Byrd. A year after Spotswood's plan had been in force, he reported that merely a third of the lands subject to quit rents had yielded more revenue than Byrd had reported for all of them in the previous year. Pardon me a second. All right, first ginger beer of the day. William Byrd plots in London. Following the enactment of Spotswood's Indian trade legislation, Byrd soon departed for England, where he was to spend nearly 5 years seeking personal support from the Hanoverian Whigs. He tried to overthrow Spotswood's entire program and dreamt of replacing the governor himself. Byrd's secret diaries for the years of Spotswood's governorship were brought to light during the 1940s and 50s. No better record is needed to measure the private thoughts and personal life of such a pathetically empty, perverted soul, whose only devotion was to pursue the favors of his oligarchical masters. The monotony of Byrd's daily accounts of his life on his estate at Westover, taking his morning milk, dancing by himself, eating his meals, and noting the weather, varies only in a limited way. Regular variations included the occasions when he cheated his wife at cards, spread her upon his billiard table for sexual gratification, or whipped her female slave himself. During his years in London, his diary's basic format showed little change except more frequent entries detailing his sexual adventures. While courting favor with George I's regime, Byrd made the rounds of all the leading brothels, slept with both women and men, took opium to overcome his, quote, weakness, and impotently solicited prostitutes and the maids at his lodgings so that he could, quote, commit uncleanness or, quote, spill his seed, as he generally put it. The reader should be spared further details. When he could, Byrd carefully recorded the list of influentials who accepted his company. These included the Duke of Argyll, a former member of Queen Anne's cabinet whom she had dismissed for his opposition to the peace, and who had forced her deathbed appointment of the Jesuitical Duke of Shrewsbury as Lord Treasurer. Another was Lord James Stanhope, from whom Byrd sought a place on the Council of Trade, the body which attempted to dictate American colonial affairs. Stanhope was one of Marlborough's former generals, who had played a leading role in the planned coup against Queen Anne in July 1714, a crime made unnecessary by her, quote, timely death. Lord Islay, the Duke of Argyll's brother, was another object of Byrd's strange attentions, whom he reported, quote, received me very kindly and advised me to bribe the German, that is King George's advisor, the Baron von Bernstorff, to get the governorship of Virginia, and told me he would put me in the way. This gaggle of Byrd's associates in London, like all his other regulars, hated Jonathan Swift. William Byrd II is still celebrated in nearly every published history of Virginia and is favorably mentioned in most modern American history surveys. Alexander Spotswood remains virtually unknown. Let us give Byrd his due in his own words on one of his better days when he had more name dropping. Okay, I think I'll just skip that. It's a bunch of trite diary entries about who he went and all of the people he rubbed shoulders with. Okay. While Byrd thus danced to the tune of the new regime in London, Spotswood pressed forward in Virginia. The other Indian traders allied to Byrd refused to describe to the new Virginia Indian Company, but the governor enlisted enough counselors, burgesses, and merchants to get the venture started. Spotswood invested 100 pounds of his own, and the subscribers chose him as governor of the company. With an eye toward developing the frontier, he promptly presented plans for new roads, bridges, and warehouses to facilitate the, quote, Indian commerce. He also accelerated his project at Germanna to bring iron production online. A message from Ireland. Alexander Spotswood already had very definite ideas on what had to be done to pursue the goal of a continental republic. With Queen Anne's death and the Venetian party's return to power under George I, The task was far more complicated than simply outflanking his opposition in Virginia. He now held the forward line in the entire campaign and urgently required some degree of broader strategic coordination. While Jonathan Swift had held a position of influence within Queen Anne's government, there had been significant opportunities to meet that need, but no longer. Swift was not even in England, and now operated from his more isolated but safer base in Ireland. His friend Robert Hunter, who was still governor of New York and New Jersey, but Hunter's choice of initiatives remained limited. He was hemmed in by Jesuit-directed Indian containment of New York's western frontiers, especially since the disaster of the Quebec expedition of 1711. Even during Queen Anne's reign, any political communication between Swift and his allies in America had to be undertaken with extreme caution and almost always through intermediaries. In the face of the murderous band licensed by George I, the difficulties were even greater. Today, more than 2.5 centuries later, the search for any historical evidence of their concerted plans would seem to confront overwhelming obstacles. One of the biggest is the fact that for more than 150 years, historians have denied that the American colonies ever had Republican aspirations. They insist that we merely sought to preserve our rights as Englishmen, quote unquote, and busily sweep away all the decisive evidence to the contrary. Happily, there is a method to overcome the madness of such historians. Take the case of Jonathan Swift, concerning his political role during a 30-year period beginning in 1707. To put the matter simply, imagine that Swift was constructing a secret tunnel for use by persons who shared his objective. We can document that the tunnel's entrance and exit are of the same design. We can also prove that persons he admitted to its entrance later emerged at his objective. We may not discover everything they were doing down there, but we certainly know where they were going. In 1715, once Spotswood was apprised of the ugly public scene in London, his most crucial decision was whether to proceed at that time with an expedition upon which America's future might depend, crossing the still unbroken line of the Blue Ridge Mountains to open up the West. Early in June, a messenger had arrived from Dublin to help him seek the answer. His name was John Fontaine, the Irish-born son of a Huguenot refugee from France. His journal of his trip to America was preserved by the descendants he left here and was published as part of a family history in the mid-19th century. Genealogies have a funny way of yielding buried historical truths if one knows what to look for. In this case, the journal preserved by the Fontaine family provides a rare glimpse into Swift's secret tunnel. The father of John Fontaine had been awarded a pension from Queen Anne for mobilizing his neighbors to beat back a French raid on the eastern coast of Ireland. The episode was certainly celebrated enough for Jonathan Swift to have known of it. John Fontaine's life story is only dimly reported, except in his own journal's account of his trip to America. What is known, however, before his departure from Ireland in November 1714, is that on 2 occasions he left his father's home for extended stays in Dublin, the center of Swift's own political networks. The first of these lasted from July 7, 1713, until the end of March 1714, a period of deepening crisis while Swift manipulated intimate access to the cabinet-level workings of Queen Anne's government. Fontaine returned to Dublin in June, shortly after Swift had removed himself from the doomed court of Queen Anne to a temporary base in the English countryside, 50 miles from London. While Swift weighed the political possibilities during the period just preceding and following the Queen's death, Fontaine remained in Dublin and was there when Swift returned in August. About 3 months later, on November 9, 1714, John Fontaine left Dublin bound for America. He stopped first at Bideford, down the Irish Sea on the west coast of England. There, he says he received a letter of introduction for Boston for the local Presbyterian minister, William Bartlett. From Massachusetts, Cotton Mather maintained a regular correspondence with ostensible Presbyterians in England, Scotland, and Ireland, often through networks centered around his own family's relations. Daniel Defoe, another of Mather's occasional correspondents and a propagandist for Robert Harley in the fight against the Venetian party's Bank of England, mentions William Bartlett as, quote, a very valuable man. While waiting through the depths of winter to set sail, Fontaine stayed in nearby Barnstable with a fellow Huguenot, Dr. Louis Mounsey, who had close ties to Boston. Mounsey's wife was the daughter of Edward Hutchinson, who had two cousins in Massachusetts, born in the 1670s, who knew Cotton Mather. The daughter of one of them married Cotton's son Samuel, who lived to proclaim America's Declaration of Independence from his pulpit in Boston in 1776. During Fontaine's stay with the Mounseys at Barnstable, he was also given letters of introduction to the Hutchinson relatives in Boston. On February 28, 1715, Fontaine sailed for Virginia and reached the Potomac by the end of May. During a stopover there, he was invited to dinner by Mrs. Mary Hughes, that's Hewes, whose daughter would marry Augustine Washington and become the mother of the first president of the United States. Fontaine proceeded to the capital at Williamsburg, arriving there on June the 3rd. His journal for June the 7th records, I waited on Governor Spotswood, and he assured me of all he could do, and after I had been with him some time, I took my leave of him. He invited me to dinner, which I accepted. Fontaine offers no details concerning the discussion, nor of many more that would follow. His journal carefully avoids substantive references, except to his seeking and receiving Spotswood help in purchasing a tract of land. What is clear, however, is that Fontaine spent the next year and a half obtaining an extraordinary education from Spotswood himself on the subject of developing the West. In November, Fontaine journeyed to Germanna, Spotswood's frontier outpost and iron-making center above the fork of the Rappahannock River. The following spring, the governor proposed a journey to his settlement on the Meherrin River called Christiana. They left together on April 13th and returned April 22nd. Not long after this second frontier expedition, and on June the 12th, 1716, Spotswood informed the Virginia Council that his rangers had found a pass over the Blue Ridge. The gateway to a continental republic was about to be opened. Curious, I'm going to look that reference up. I'd like to see where that opening over the Blue Ridge is. Note 29. Oh. Okay, that's a reference to a book called The Five George Masons. And I don't have that book, The Five George Masons. It's a story written by a subsequent descendant of George Mason, the proprietor over there where I have worked so many years as a teacher and musician. It apparently describes this incident in that book. Now, Andy is now pulling up, I think, the later map called the Frye Jefferson Map. This is a map from 1755, I think, and it's far more developed than 1715, which we showed at the beginning of the show. And that's what Spotswood has accomplished, is in those 40 years to get away from the tidal water, the tide water, quote unquote, settlements, and move inland to create roads and bridges and mines and towns and foundries and, to develop. Spotswood had long waited for this moment. He wished to forever dispel the oligarchical myth that settlement beyond the mountains was impossible. After years of exploratory patrols, his rangers had found a mountain gap where passage was not limited to daring adventurers. I'll tell you, Andy, I know where it must be. It must be between Charlottesville and Waynesboro. Probably, yeah. Yeah, it's actually probably exactly the same gap that you go through on Route 64 today as you're going west. I imagine that's it, yeah. I can't see the details from here.
Orange County's up here.
Yeah, Orange County is Madison, and Charlottesville, I think, is in Albemarle County, if I recall.
And this is Albemarle. So
Okay.
that's probably that's the gap right there.
Yeah. After years of exploratory patrols, his rangers had found a mountain gap where passage was not limited to daring adventurers, traveling with only the barest necessities. They had instead discovered one suitable for easy crossings with supply trains, and Spotswood determined to demonstrate that feasibility himself. During the summer of 1716, he recruited a, quote, company of gentlemen, unquote, for an expedition beyond the Blue Ridge. Many of them came from families already looking to the west, whose sons and grandsons became prominent figures of the future American Republic. Among these was George Mason, whose son became a member of the Ohio Company, organized to promote settlement in that region before the French and Indian War of 1754 to 63. The younger Mason later succeeded George Washington as a delegate to the Virginia Convention at the outset of the American Revolution and designed much of the Constitution of the new state of Virginia. Others included James Taylor, ancestor of President James Madison, and Zachary Taylor, Robert Brooke, whose grandson of the same name became governor of Virginia, and Thomas Todd, whose family later helped secure Kentucky against the British during the Revolution. Another of Spotswood's companions, once again, was the visitor from Dublin, John Fontaine, whose journal provides the only detailed account of the expedition. Spotswood led his party out of Williamsburg on August the 20th, and thence to a rendezvous at Germanna with two companies of rangers. Now, Germanna still exists. I imagine you could find that on a contemporary map if you wanted to just Google it or something. Um, There he had a surprise in store of tremendous symbolic and practical significance. Virginia's first ironworks were now operational, and Spotswood ordered that both pack and riding horses be equipped with iron horseshoes for the journey over the mountains. The horseshoes were something of an innovation for Virginia. The lack of domestic iron and the colony's gentle terrain in the Tidewater region had long accustomed Virginians to riding their horses unshod. Spotswood's point was that an American iron industry was essential, not only for crossing the Blue Ridge Mountains, but for the economic development of all that lay beyond. Without iron, there would be no wheel rims, barrel bands, wood saws, axes, stovepots, rifles, hoes, and plows. Without iron, there could be no republic. Spotswood had no titles to bestow, but those who accompanied him beyond the Blue Ridge became known as the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, for he later presented the miniature golden horseshoes to them to commemorate the historic occasion. Spotswood had inscribed them, quote, Sic juvat transcendere montes. Thus we crossed the mountain. The mountain pass lay roughly 50 miles west of Germanna, but was still at the end of the earth for Virginia. Yet within 30 years of America's Declaration of Independence, two of Spotswood's political heirs in Virginia, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, would plant the flag of the United States on the shores of the Pacific Ocean at the mouth of the Columbia River in Oregon. Spotswood knew he was making history when he led his company out of Germanna along the South Fork of the Rappahannock, which he had named the Rapidanna River. He camped the first night by a stream he named Expedition Run. On September 5th, he camped by a stream just below the summit of the Blue Ridge in the pass his rangers had charted. Even today, this site suggests Jonathan Swift's contributions to America. Fontaine's journal, perhaps for understandable reasons, records no ceremonial naming by Spotswood in this case. Yet, on any detailed road map of Virginia, one can still find Swift Run Gap, where U.S. Highway 33 crosses the Blue Ridge, heading to Harrisonburg. It could be argued that any stream descending a mountain might be named descriptively a swift run, but only this one bears such a name along the Blue Ridge, and no stream's natural attributes are known to have earned the name Expedition. On the other side of the Blue Ridge, Alexander Spotswood found a major inland river. He led his expedition across it in triumph and named it the Euphrates. He then invoked the bold venture of Alexander the Great, who, on behalf of Plato's Academy in ancient Greece, led his city-building forces beyond the barbarian boundaries of the Persian Empire. In today's Middle East, the Euphrates River still bears its ancient name. In Virginia, the river Spotswood crossed has long since been known as the Shenandoah, an Indian name meaning daughter of the stars. Its long valley, running southwest between the Blue Ridge and the Appalachian Mountains, became a strategic corridor for the American Revolution. Spotswood's company reached the west bank of the Shenandoah on September 6, 1716, and changed the course of history. Spotswood had come prepared for a major celebration. At a feast that evening along the river, the glasses were raised for toast after toast, punctuated by volleys of musket fire, and his party drank imported Burgundy, claret, Virginia red wine and white wine, Irish whiskyball, brandy shrub, two sorts of rum, champagne, canary, cherry, punch, cider, etc., as Fontaine somehow managed to record it in his journal. They broke camp the next day and began their return trip, reaching Spotswood's base at Germanna on September the 10th. There, the expedition disbanded, but the governor and John Fontaine remained for 3 more days before making for Williamsburg. Certainly, Spotswood was already planning how to follow through on his opening of the Shenandoah Valley, but Fontaine's journal is again discreetly silent. We do know that Governor Spotswood quickly determined to build up the iron operations at Germanna. Colonial land records show that on October 31st, 1716, not long after his return to Williamsburg, a grant of 3,229 acres of land was made to William Robertson, clerk of the Virginia Council. Robertson was also a Knight of the Golden Horseshoe. 1 month later, he transferred the land title to Spotswood. Apparently, the first land Spotswood owned in America, the tract was located along the Rapidan River adjoining the Germanna site. In 1717, he brought in 80 more German immigrants, 20 Lutheran families recruited in Alsace and the Palatinate, who were originally to have been settled in Pennsylvania. That course of German immigration to America, interestingly enough, was generally directed for William Penn by August Hermann Franke, who had worked with Leibniz and maintained an extensive correspondence with Cotton Mather in Boston. Their change of destination following Spotswood's opening of the Shenandoah is suggestive of the sort of coordination involved. This new contingent of Germans also arrived penniless. Spotswood again paid the passage money and indentured them to his own service for work in his iron enterprise. They may have been employed in developing his tubal furnace near La Roche Run, about 13 miles from the first settlement at Germanna. Beyond building up the economic machinery required for colonizing the West, Spotswood confronted the major unresolved strategic issues. His objective had never been the Shenandoah Valley itself, except as a vital corridor for conquering the vast wilderness that lay beyond it. As he later informed the generally hostile Board of Trade in London, quote, "The chief aim of my expedition over the Great Mountains in 1716 was to satisfy myself whether it was practicable to come at the Great Lakes. Having on that occasion found an easy passage over the great ridge of mountains which before were judged unpassable, I also discovered by relation of Indians who frequent these parts, that from the pass where I was, it was but 3 days' march to a great nation of Indians living on a river which discharges itself into Lake Erie." Even if allowances are made both for Spotswood's habit of making the most difficult tasks seem easy and for imprecise intelligence received by, quote, relation of Indians, his report is still credible. From the camp he made on the banks of the Shenandoah, it is less than 100 miles to the Monongahela River in present-day West Virginia. The Monongahela River flows north into the junction of the Ohio and Allegheny Rivers, at the point which became the center of America's giant steel industry, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. George Washington, on a mission in 1753 to assess the French military buildup in the West, moved north from there up the Allegheny to its junction with French Creek at Venango, later renamed Franklin, Pennsylvania, 60 miles south of Lake Erie. He followed French Creek 40 miles north to the French outpost at Fort Le Boeuf, not far from the stream's origin, less than 10 miles from Lake Erie. Spotswood told the Board of Trade, quote, "I have often regretted that after so many years as these countries have been seated, no attempts have been made to discover the sources of our rivers, nor to establish in correspondence with those nations of Indians to the westward of us, even after the certain knowledge of the progress made by the French in surrounding us with their settlements." He continued to press for settlements in the West. To prevent the dangers which threaten His Majesty's dominions here from the growing power of these neighbors, nothing seems to me of more consequence than now, while the nations are at peace, and while the French are yet incapable of possessing all that vast tract which lies on the back of these plantations, we should attempt to make some settlement on the Great Lakes, and at the same time possess ourselves of those passes of the great mountains which are necessary to preserve a communication with such settlements. The route to the Great Lakes in 1716 ran through territories only sparsely inhabited by Indians largely hostile to the Jesuit-run tribes of Canada. These Indians, allied as the Iroquois Confederation, claimed most of upper and western New York, most of Pennsylvania, and the eastern portion of the Ohio Valley. Their 5 nations had recently added a 6th, the Tuscaroras, who had moved north from the Carolinas and through the Shenandoah into the eastern Ohio country. To negotiate rights of settlement in the Shenandoah or passages north to the Great Lakes, Spotswood would have to deal with the leadership of the Iroquois Confederation based in upstate New York. He would need the assistance of Jonathan Swift's close friend, New York Governor Robert Hunter. On October 14, 1716, less than a month after returning from their journey across the Blue Ridge, Alexander Spotswood and John Fontaine dined together in Williamsburg. Fontaine left the next day for New York City, where he landed on October 26th. The next morning, he reports in his journal, "At 11, I waited on Governor Hunter, where I was received very kindly. He invited me to dinner with him." Fontaine stayed for several weeks, during which he met and dined frequently with Hunter. Again, his journal entries are discreet, but he records additional meetings and dinners with leading officials in New York. These included Hunter's close ally, Lewis Morris, whom he had appointed Chief Justice the previous year, and who later served as governor of New Jersey. Fontaine also met with John Hamilton, appointed by Hunter to the Council of New Jersey in 1713, who was now Postmaster General in the colonies. As such, Hamilton controlled not merely the mail, but the only efficient intelligence service existing in the American colonies as a whole. Later, with Jonathan Swift's help, Spotswood himself became colonial postmaster in 1730. Fontaine left New York for Virginia in mid-November, and on November 1st at 11 came to Williamsburg. I went and visited the governor. Meanwhile, from New York, Governor Hunter began issuing a steady flow of proposals to the British government for new settlements and outposts on Lake Ontario in western New York. Fontaine remained in Virginia until 1719, the year Robert Hunter returned to London to coordinate yet another phase of America's struggle. The young Irishman secured lands in Virginia for his son, who lived to support the cause of American independence. Fontaine returned to Dublin, perhaps to report to Jonathan Swift, on December 5th, 1719. Well, there is the story of Alexander Spotswood opening up the West by crossing the Blue Ridge Mountains and crossing the Shenandoah River, which he called the Euphrates, and thought of himself in terms of Alexander the Great. I love this golden horseshoe thing. I wonder if that's the beginning of some secret society that still exists. I'm going to have to do a lot of research into these people. This man Hamilton sounds fascinating. If he was running an intelligence service, aka the colonial postmaster, which of course that use of the postmaster is one of the famous control mechanisms of the Rothschilds in Europe through a small but mighty kingdom called Turn and Taxis, Thurn and Taxis. The use of the mails as a way to gather intelligence is just another feature of the deception of the oligarchs, the elites that will control us without our knowledge if we let them. And so the more things change, the more they are the same. Thanks a lot, Andy, for another very fun and interesting show that we do together here as you are a master at pulling up interesting and relevant graphics that we can share with folks. And I love the way you've set up the reading chair here in the studio. It's a bright sunny day, as you can see some light filtering in through onto my shirt here. And I think it's time to wrap it up, Andy, and let's get outside for a couple of minutes before you need to put back your headphones on for the Blackberry Belton Road Show at noon with George Webb.